Sarah Mitchell was 23 years old, standing in the rain at her father's grave, when her stepmother handed her an envelope. Inside was $500 and a note that said, "This is all you're getting. Be gone by Monday." She had 72 hours to leave the only home she'd ever known. Sarah's father had just been buried that morning, and already, the woman he'd married was erasing his daughter from their lives. But what Diane didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that Robert Mitchell had seen this coming. He'd prepared for this exact moment. He'd left Sarah something that would change everything. And 5 years later, when Sarah walked back through those doors, Diane's face went white. Because the stepdaughter she'd thrown away had returned, and this time, Sarah held all the cards. This is a story about inheritance, betrayal, and the long game of justice. It's about a father who loved his daughter enough to protect her from beyond the grave. It's about a stepmother who thought she'd won everything. And it's about a young woman who spent 5 years preparing for the moment when she'd take it all back. 3 questions will haunt you through this story. Question 1. What did Sarah's father really leave her? And why did he hide it from his wife? Question 2. Why was Diane so desperate to get rid of Sarah the moment Robert died? And question 3. What secret would destroy Diane's entire life 5 years later when Sarah came back? The answers will shock you. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For the first 16 years of her life, Sarah Mitchell thought she had it all. She grew up in a comfortable home in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Her father, Robert Mitchell, was a self-made man who'd built a commercial real estate business from absolutely nothing. He'd started in his 20s, working construction jobs during the day and taking community college classes at night. By the time he was 30, he'd saved enough to buy his first rental property, a rundown duplex on the east side of town that he renovated himself on weekends. By 35, he owned 5 properties. By 40, he'd expanded into commercial real estate, buying strip malls and office buildings. Robert wasn't flashy about his success. He drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and wore jeans to the office, but he was smart, careful, and he knew how to spot opportunities that other people missed. Sarah's mother, Linda, was a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could light up a room. She'd met Robert at a community fundraiser when they were both in their 20s, and they'd fallen in love over shared dreams of building a family and a future together. Sarah was born 2 years after they got married, and for 8 beautiful years, life was exactly what it was supposed to be. Linda would make pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings. Robert would take Sarah to his office on Saturdays, where she'd play with the copy machine and draw pictures at his desk while he worked. They'd take vacations to the Great Smoky Mountains every summer, camping in tents and roasting marshmallows over campfires. Sarah's childhood was filled with love, laughter, and the kind of security that comes from knowing your parents would do anything for you. Then, when Sarah was 8 years old, Linda found a lump in her breast. The diagnosis came back as stage 3 cancer. Linda fought for 2 years, going through surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. She lost her hair, lost her strength, but never lost her smile around Sarah. She'd tell her daughter, "We're going to beat this, baby girl. We're going to be okay." But they weren't okay. Linda died 3 weeks after Sarah's 10th birthday, on a rainy April morning that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. Robert held his daughter while she cried, and he made her a promise. "I will always be here for you. always, and for the next 6 years. He kept that promise. Robert threw himself into being both parents. He learned how to braid Sarah's hair, even though his first attempts looked like tangled rope. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game. He helped with homework, drove her to sleepovers, and stayed up late having talks about boys and friendships and all the things teenage girls worry about. He taught Sarah about money, about business, about standing up for herself in a world that would try to tell her she couldn't do things because she was a girl. On weekends, they'd still work together in his office downtown. But now Sarah was old enough to help with real tasks, organizing files, answering phones, learning the basics of property management. Robert would say, "Someday all of this will be yours. You need to know how it works." Those were the golden years, the ones Sarah would look back on with such clarity that they'd feel like yesterday. It was just father and daughter against the world, and they were winning. Sarah excelled in school, made friends easily, and dreamed of studying graphic design in college. Robert supported every dream, every goal, every ambition. He'd tell her, "You can be anything you want to be. Don't let anyone tell you different." Sarah believed him. She believed that life would always be this good, that nothing could shake the foundation they'd built together. She was wrong. When Sarah turned 16, Robert met Diane Thompson at a real estate conference in Chicago. Sarah would later learn the details of that first meeting from her father, who'd been almost embarrassed to admit he'd fallen for someone so quickly. Diane had been working as an events coordinator at the hotel where the conference was held. She was 43 years old, 15 years younger than Robert, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that made people trust her instantly. She'd approached Robert during a coffee break, struck up a conversation about the challenges of property management, and by the end of the weekend, they'd exchanged phone numbers. Robert called her the following Monday. They had their first date that Friday at an Italian restaurant downtown. 3 months later, Robert told Sarah he'd met someone special. Sarah wanted so badly to be happy for her father. She really did. Robert had been alone for 6 years since Linda died. He'd devoted every ounce of his energy to raising Sarah, building his business, and just surviving the grief of losing his wife. He deserved happiness. He deserved companionship. He deserved love. So when Robert introduced Sarah to Diane over dinner at their favorite steakhouse, Sarah smiled and shook Diane's hand and told herself that this was a good thing. Diane was charming that first night. She asked Sarah questions about school, about her interests, about her plans for the future. She complimented Sarah's earrings, her smile, her intelligence. She told stories about growing up in Cleveland, about working her way through college, about the challenges of being a woman in the hospitality industry. She made Robert laugh in a way Sarah hadn't heard in years. And when dinner ended, Diane hugged Sarah and said, "I hope we can be friends. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I could never do that. But I'd love to get to know you." Robert and Diane dated for 8 months before he proposed. The proposal happened on Christmas Eve, in front of the fireplace in their living room, with Sarah sitting right there on the couch. Robert got down on one knee, pulled out a ring, and asked Diane to marry him. Diane said yes through happy tears. She hugged Robert, then turned and hugged Sarah, whispering, "We're going to be a family." The wedding was 4 months later, in April, at a country club outside Columbus. It was a small ceremony with about 50 guests, mostly Robert's business associates and a few family members. Diane wore a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car. She'd insisted on paying for the dress herself, telling Robert, I want to contribute. I'm not marrying you for your money. Sarah was the maid of honor. She stood next to Diane during the ceremony, holding the bouquet, trying not to think about her mother and how different things would have been if Linda were still alive. At the reception, Diane gave a speech about how grateful she was to join the Mitchell family, how much she loved Robert, and how excited she was to be a stepmother to Sarah. She said all the right things. She looked at Sarah with what seemed like genuine affection. She promised to love and honor Robert until death did them part. Everyone applauded. Sarah cried happy tears that day. She believed every word. She wanted to believe that her father had found someone who would make him happy for the rest of his life. She wanted to believe that Diane would be the mother figure she'd been missing since she was 10 years old. She wanted to believe that their family, broken for so long, was finally whole again. For the first 6 months of the marriage, everything seemed perfect. Diane moved into the house Sarah had grown up in, the house where Linda had lived and died, and she didn't try to change too much. She kept Linda's photos on the mantel. She asked Sarah's permission before redecorating any of the rooms. She made Robert's favorite meals and organized family movie nights on Fridays, just like Linda used to do. She'd ask Sarah about her day at school, help with college applications, and offer advice about boys and friendships. Sarah started to let her guard down. She started to think that maybe, just maybe, this was going to work out. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Sarah started noticing small things first. The way Diane's smile would fade the moment Robert left the room. How Diane would answer her phone and immediately walk outside or into the garage, her voice dropping to a whisper. The way Diane would redirect conversations whenever Robert talked about updating his will or discussing the future of his business. One night, Robert mentioned wanting to take Sarah to visit potential colleges on the East Coast. Diane's expression darkened. She said, "Don't you think Sarah's old enough to handle that herself? You're babying her, Robert. She needs to grow up." The comment stung, but Robert laughed it off and told Diane he just wanted to spend time with his daughter before she left for college. Diane smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. Sarah started paying closer attention. She noticed that Diane had expensive tastes, designer purses, high-end jewelry, luxury spa days, weekend trips to New York City for shopping. Robert never complained about the spending. He made good money, and he wanted his wife to be happy. But Sarah wondered where all of Diane's own money was. Diane claimed she'd been working as an events coordinator, but she'd quit her job 2 weeks after marrying Robert, saying she wanted to focus on being a wife and homemaker. Sarah thought it was strange that someone would give up their career so quickly, but she kept her thoughts to herself. She didn't want to cause problems in her father's marriage. She didn't want to be the jealous stepdaughter who couldn't accept her father's happiness. Then, one night in late October, Sarah was up late studying for her SATs when she heard Diane on the phone downstairs. It was past midnight. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. Sarah had come down to get a glass of water and maybe a snack to keep her awake through another hour of practice tests. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard Diane's voice, sharp and cold in a way Sarah had never heard before. Diane said, "Once the old man is out of the picture, everything changes. Just be patient. We've done this before. We can do it again." Sarah froze on the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought Diane might hear it. She didn't move. She barely breathed. Diane continued, "The life insurance policy is already in place, $2 million, and he's got assets worth at least $10 million, probably more. The business alone is worth 8. We just need to wait for the right moment. Sarah's hands were shaking. She didn't understand what she was hearing. Was Diane talking about Robert? Was she talking about killing him? That couldn't be right. That couldn't be what this meant. Sarah's 17-year-old brain couldn't process what she was hearing. Diane's voice dropped even lower. I'll call you tomorrow. He's sleeping, but I don't want to risk him waking up. Just remember, patience, timing, and we walk away with everything. Then Diane hung up. Sarah heard footsteps heading toward the stairs. She panicked, turned, and ran back up to her room as quietly as she could. She closed the door, locked it, and sat on her bed with her knees pulled to her chest. Her mind raced. Should she tell her father? Should she confront Diane? What if she'd misunderstood? What if it was about something else entirely? But deep down, Sarah knew what she'd heard, and it terrified her. The next morning at breakfast, Sarah watched Diane carefully. Diane smiled at Robert, poured his coffee, kissed his cheek. She was the perfect wife. Sarah couldn't reconcile the woman sitting across from her with the voice she'd heard on the phone. So she said nothing. She told herself she'd misunderstood. She told herself it was nothing. She was just a kid trying to make sense of adult conversations that felt heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. But the fear stayed with her. The doubt stayed with her. And she started watching Diane more closely than ever before. Sarah graduated high school the following spring and enrolled at Ohio State University to study graphic design. She moved into the dorms, grateful for the distance from home and from Diane. College was everything Sarah hoped it would be. She made friends, joined clubs, discovered her passion for visual storytelling. She worked part-time at a campus coffee shop and spent her weekends working on design projects. She'd come home every few weeks to have dinner with Robert, and every time she did, she noticed changes. Her father seemed tired, stressed. He'd lost weight. He told Sarah it was just the demands of the business, that he was working on a big deal that was taking up all his time and energy. But Sarah wondered if it was something more. Diane, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. She'd redecorated the entire house, replacing Linda's touches with expensive modern furniture and abstract art that looked like it belonged in a museum. She'd convinced Robert to join the country club, to attend charity galas, to move in social circles that he'd never cared about before. Robert went along with it all because he loved his wife and wanted her to be happy. But Sarah could see the toll it was taking on him. He looked exhausted. He looked older than his years. And every time Sarah tried to talk to him alone, Diane would find an excuse to join them or interrupt the conversation. During Sarah's sophomore year of college, Robert had what the doctors called a minor health scare. He'd experienced chest pains at work, and his business partner had driven him to the emergency room. Tests revealed that Robert had high blood pressure and high cholesterol. The doctors prescribed medication and recommended lifestyle changes. Less stress, better diet, more exercise. Robert took it seriously. He started running in the mornings. He changed his diet. He cut back on his hours at the office. For a few months, he seemed better. Healthier, more like himself. Sarah was relieved. She thought maybe her father would be okay after all. She thought maybe she'd been paranoid about Diane, reading danger into situations that were perfectly innocent. But then Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. During Christmas break of her junior year, she was home for 2 weeks. One afternoon, while looking for wrapping paper in the hall closet, Sarah found a stack of insurance documents tucked into a box on the top shelf. She wasn't snooping intentionally, but the documents caught her eye because her father's name was on them. She pulled them down and started reading. Diane had taken out a life insurance policy on Robert. $2 million. The policy was dated from 6 months earlier. Sarah's hands shook as she read through the paperwork. Life insurance wasn't unusual. Lots of married couples had policies on each other. But $2 million seemed excessive, especially when Robert already had life insurance through his business. And the timing bothered Sarah. Why would Diane take out this policy now, just months after Robert's health scare? Sarah put the documents back exactly where she'd found them. She didn't say anything to her father. What would she say? Your wife took out life insurance on you? That's not a crime. That's not even particularly unusual. But combined with what Sarah had overheard 2 years earlier, it felt threatening. It felt calculated. Sarah spent the rest of her Christmas break watching Diane, looking for signs of whatever threat she felt lurking beneath the surface of their picture-perfect life. But Diane gave nothing away. She was the devoted wife, always at Robert's side, always concerned about his health, always making sure he took his medication and ate his vegetables and didn't work too hard. She was perfect. Too perfect. Sarah graduated college in May with a degree in graphic design and a job offer from a small marketing firm in downtown Columbus. She moved into an apartment with 2 roommates, excited to start her career and her adult life. She saw her father regularly, meeting him for lunch once a week at a diner halfway between their offices. Those lunches were sacred to Sarah. They were the only time she got to talk to Robert without Diane hovering nearby. And during those lunches, Sarah started to see cracks in her father's facade. He seemed sad, worried. He'd make comments about retirement, about wanting to travel, about feeling like time was running out. Sarah would tell him he was only 58, that he had decades ahead of him, that he should stop being so morbid. But Robert would just smile and change the subject. 3 weeks after Sarah's 23rd birthday, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October. Sarah was at work, sitting in a conference room reviewing mock-ups for a client presentation. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Sarah almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. A woman's voice said, "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes," Sarah said. "This is Dr. Patel from Riverside Hospital. Your father has been brought to our emergency room. You need to come right away." Sarah's world tilted. She grabbed her bag and ran. Sarah drove to Riverside Hospital, going 20 miles over the speed limit, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Her mind raced through possibilities, through scenarios, through prayers she didn't even know she remembered. Let him be okay. Please let him be okay. I'll do anything. Just let him be okay. The hospital parking lot was a blur. Sarah ran through the emergency room doors and gave her name to the receptionist. A nurse led her to a private waiting room, the kind they use when the news is going to be bad. Sarah's stomach dropped. A doctor came in a few minutes later. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, with tired eyes and a gentle voice. He introduced himself as Dr. Patel. He said, "Your father collapsed at his office this afternoon around 2 p.m. His business partner called 911 immediately, and paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They performed CPR on scene and continued life-saving measures during transport. We've been working on him for the past hour, but I'm very sorry to tell you that we were unable to revive him. Robert Mitchell died at 3:47 p.m. from what appears to be a massive myocardial infarction, a heart attack." Sarah couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. They were in English. She understood each individual word, but strung together they became meaningless noise. She said, "That's not possible. He's been running every morning. He's been eating healthy. He just had a checkup last month and everything was fine." Dr. Patel's expression was kind but firm. "I understand this is a shock. Sometimes these things happen even when someone is doing everything right. Your father had underlying cardiovascular disease that may not have shown symptoms. The human heart is complicated, and sometimes it just gives out without warning. Would you like to see him?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The doctor led her to a room where her father lay on a bed, covered with a white sheet up to his chest. He looked like he was sleeping. His face was peaceful. Sarah touched his hand. It was still warm. She waited for him to squeeze back, to open his eyes, to tell her this was all a mistake, but he didn't move. He was gone. Sarah sat with her father's body for an hour, holding his hand and crying so hard she thought she might be sick. Nurses came and went, offering tissues and water and sympathetic touches on her shoulder. Eventually, someone asked about contacting other family members. Sarah said, "My stepmother, Diane. Someone needs to call her." The nurse said that Diane had already been contacted and was on her way. Sarah wondered how Diane had been reached before Sarah herself was called, but she was too numb to ask questions. She just sat there, holding her father's hand, trying to memorize every detail of his face because she knew this would be the last time she'd see him. Diane arrived 30 minutes later. She swept into the room wearing a black designer tracksuit, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked at Robert's body and let out a theatrical sob. She rushed to the bedside, pushing past Sarah, and threw herself across Robert's chest. "Oh my God," she wailed. "Oh my God, Robert, no, please no." The nurses gave her space to grieve. Sarah stood in the corner, watching Diane's performance with a detached sense of unreality. Because that's what it was, a performance. Sarah could see it in the way Diane's eyes stayed dry even as she sobbed. She could see it in the way Diane glanced around the room to make sure people were watching her grief. She could see it in the way Diane's body language was all wrong, too stiff, too calculated. This wasn't the grief of a woman who'd just lost the love of her life. This was the grief of a woman playing a part. After 20 minutes of Diane's theatrics, a hospital administrator came to discuss next steps. Arrangements needed to be made. Paperwork needed to be signed. Decisions needed to be made about the body, about an autopsy, about funeral homes. Diane took charge immediately. She said, "I'll handle everything. I'm his wife. I know what he would have wanted." She turned to Sarah and said, almost as an afterthought, "You should go home and rest, dear. You look exhausted. I'll take care of this." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist on being part of the decisions, but she was too tired, too shocked, too broken. She nodded and left the hospital in a daze. The next few days passed in a fog. The autopsy revealed what Dr. Patel had said: massive heart attack, likely caused by an undiagnosed blockage in one of Robert's coronary arteries. Death was instantaneous. He didn't suffer. That's what everyone kept telling Sarah. He didn't suffer. As if that made it better. As if that made any of this okay. The funeral was scheduled for the following Tuesday at a church Robert had never attended, but that Diane insisted was appropriate. Diane planned everything: the flowers, the music, the reception afterward. She hired a professional photographer to document the service. She posted on social media about her grief, about what an amazing man Robert had been, about how she'd never love again. the comment section filled with condolences and sympathy. Diane responded to every single one, thanking people for their support and sharing anecdotes about Robert that Sarah knew weren't even true. The funeral was on a gray Tuesday in November, one of those days where the sky looks like old concrete and the wind cuts through your coat no matter how many layers you wear. Sarah arrived at the church early, hoping for a few quiet moments before everyone else showed up. She wanted to sit in the front pew and feel close to her father one more time. But Diane was already there, holding court with Robert's business associates, accepting condolences with practiced grace. She wore black Chanel and a strand of pearls that had belonged to Linda, Sarah's mother. Sarah felt sick seeing those pearls around Diane's neck, but she said nothing. This wasn't the time or place for a confrontation. The service was generic and impersonal. The pastor, who'd never met Robert, delivered a eulogy cobbled together from information Diane had provided. He talked about Robert as a businessman, a husband, a pillar of the community. He barely mentioned Sarah. When it came time for family to speak, Diane stood at the podium and delivered a speech that would have won an Oscar. She talked about how Robert had been the love of her life, how their 5 years together had been the happiest of her existence, how she didn't know how she'd go on without him. She cried beautiful tears that never smudged her mascara. She thanked everyone for coming and supporting her through this difficult time. She never once looked at Sarah. After the service, mourners made their way to the cemetery for the burial. Sarah stood at the graveside, watching as her father's casket was lowered into the ground. She thought about all the things she'd never get to say to him, all the conversations they'd never have, all the moments they'd never share. She thought about the future he'd planned for her, the one where she'd take over his business and build something even bigger. That future was gone now. Everything was gone. The rain started as the pastor said the final prayer. It was a cold, miserable rain that soaked through clothes and chilled to the bone. People scattered quickly, heading to their cars and to the country club where Diane had organized a reception. Sarah stayed at the graveside long after everyone else had left. She stood in the rain, watching the cemetery workers fill in her father's grave, and she said goodbye. When Sarah finally made her way to the reception, it was already in full swing. The country club was decorated with white flowers and soft lighting. There was a buffet spread, an open bar, and a slideshow of photos from Robert's life playing on a large screen. Diane moved through the crowd like a professional mourner, accepting hugs and sympathy with perfect composure. Sarah found a quiet corner and watched. She watched Diane laugh at someone's story about Robert. She watched Diane take a glass of wine from a server and sip it delicately. She watched Diane check her phone and smile at whatever message she'd received. And Sarah felt a cold, hard certainty settle into her chest. This woman had killed her father. Sarah had no proof, no evidence, nothing that would hold up in court. But she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. The reception wound down around 8 p.m. Guests trickled out, offering final condolences to Diane and awkward pats on the shoulder to Sarah. By 9, the country club was empty except for Sarah, Diane, and the catering staff cleaning up. Sarah gathered her purse, ready to leave and drive to her friend Amanda's apartment, where she'd been invited to stay for a few days. But Diane called out to her. Sarah. Wait, can you come back to the house for a moment? We need to talk. Sarah's stomach clenched, but she nodded. She followed Diane's car through the dark streets of Columbus, back to the house where Sarah had grown up, the house where her mother had died and her father had raised her, and where, apparently, her stepmother was about to deliver whatever blow came next. The house was dark when they arrived. Diane didn't turn on many lights, just the lamp in the living room and the light over the kitchen sink. She gestured for Sarah to sit on the couch. Sarah sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Diane disappeared into the study for a moment, then returned with a plain white envelope. She stood in front of Sarah, not sitting, maintaining a physical dominance that felt intentional. Diane said, "I want to talk to you about your father's estate and your future." Sarah said nothing. Diane continued, "Your father's will was very clear. He left everything to me. The house, the business, the bank accounts, the investments, everything. As his legal spouse, I inherit his entire estate. You need to understand that this is how things are." Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. She'd known Diane was horrible, but she hadn't expected this level of cruelty, this level of calculation delivered just hours after burying Robert. Sarah managed to say, "What about me?" Diane's expression was cold. "You're 23 years old, Sarah, an adult. Your father supported you through college. He gave you a wonderful education and a strong start in life. That's more than many people get. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet." Sarah's voice shook. "This is my home." Diane's smile was sharp as a knife. "This is my house now. Everything in it belongs to me. Your father made his choices, and you need to respect them." Sarah wanted to scream, wanted to argue, wanted to demand to see the will, to talk to lawyers, to fight. But she was exhausted, grief-stricken, and completely unprepared for this conversation. Diane held out the white envelope. "This is for you. Consider it a gift, a head start on your new independent life." Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. She opened it. Inside was $500 in cash, 5 crisp $100 bills, and a handwritten note on Diane's personal stationery. The note read, "You're an adult now. Your father supported you long enough. Be out of the house by Monday. Don't take anything that isn't yours. Everything here belongs to me now." Sarah stared at the note, reading it over and over, trying to make sense of the words. $500. That's what her father's life was worth to Diane. That's what Sarah's entire childhood, her entire history, her entire connection to her family was worth. $500 and a 3-day eviction notice. Sarah looked up at Diane. Her stepmother's face was blank, almost bored, like this was a minor inconvenience rather than the destruction of Sarah's entire world. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "How can you do this?" Diane shrugged. "I'm doing you a favor, really. You need to learn to survive on your own. Your father babied you. He gave you everything. That's not how the real world works. I'm teaching you a valuable lesson. Now I need you to understand the rules. You have until Monday morning at 9 a.m. to be out of this house. You can take your personal belongings, your clothes, your electronics, things that are clearly yours. You cannot take furniture, artwork, kitchenware, or anything else that belongs to the house. If you're not gone by Monday morning, I'll have the locks changed and your belongings will be placed on the curb." "Do we understand each other?" Sarah couldn't speak. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Diane's expression softened slightly, but it wasn't kindness. It was satisfaction. "Good. I'm glad we could handle this maturely. You're welcome to use your key to come and go over the next few days as you pack. But Monday morning, that key needs to be left on the kitchen counter. After that, you're no longer welcome here." Sarah stood on shaking legs. She walked to the door, clutching the envelope with $500 and the note that had just made her homeless. She turned back to look at Diane one more time. Her stepmother was already walking toward the stairs, pulling out her phone, moving on with her life. Sarah left the house where she'd grown up, where her mother had died, where her father had raised her with so much love. She left knowing she'd never be welcome there again. And as she sat in her car in the driveway, crying so hard she couldn't catch her breath, Sarah had no idea that her father had already planned for this exact moment, that he'd already put pieces in place to protect her, that the next 7 months would change everything. Sarah spent that night on her friend Amanda's couch, crying until she had no tears left. Amanda and her boyfriend, Marcus, were kind and supportive, bringing Sarah tissues and tea and promising she could stay as long as she needed. But Sarah knew she couldn't impose on their hospitality forever. She had $500 to her name, a car that barely ran, and a job at a marketing firm that paid $35,000 a year before taxes. After rent, car insurance, student loan payments, and basic living expenses, she'd have almost nothing left. Finding an apartment on her own was impossible. She couldn't afford first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. She needed to come up with a plan, and fast. That weekend, Sarah went back to her childhood home to pack her belongings. She chose times when Diane was out, using her key to slip in and out quickly. She packed her clothes, her laptop, her childhood photos, her books. She packed the stuffed elephant her father had given her when she was 5. She packed her mother's jewelry box, the one Linda had left for her. She packed certificates and awards and mementos from a life that was now over. Everything fit into her car and 6 cardboard boxes. 23 years of life reduced to what could fit in a Honda Civic. On Monday morning, Sarah left her key on the kitchen counter as instructed and walked out of the house for what she thought was the last time. The next 6 months were the hardest of Sarah's life. She bounced from couch to couch, staying with Amanda, then with her college friend Jessica, then with her co-worker Brandon. She worked her graphic design job during the day and picked up a second job waitressing at a diner on evenings and weekends. She was exhausted all the time, running on 4 hours of sleep and instant coffee. She ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. She wore the same 5 outfits on rotation. She stopped going out with friends because she couldn't afford it. She stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Every penny went toward saving for an apartment deposit, but it felt impossible. The goal kept moving further away. Sarah wanted to fight Diane legally. She wanted to challenge the will, to demand an accounting of her father's estate, to understand how it was possible that Robert Mitchell had left nothing for his only daughter. But consultations with lawyers revealed a harsh truth. Diane had been Robert's legal spouse. Unless Sarah could prove undue influence or fraud or incompetence, Diane had every right to inherit everything. And proving any of those things would cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees that Sarah didn't have. The lawyers all said the same thing. You can fight this, but it'll cost you more than you'd likely win. And Sarah, drowning in grief and survival, didn't have the resources to fight. She fell into a depression that winter. Some days she could barely get out of bed. She'd call in sick to work and lie on Amanda's couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the point of anything was. Her father was gone. Her home was gone. Her future was gone. She had nothing and no one. Amanda and Marcus did their best to support her, but they couldn't fix the hole that grief had carved into Sarah's chest. A therapist might have helped, but Sarah couldn't afford one. Free resources had 6-month waiting lists. So Sarah just tried to survive, one day at a time, wondering if things would ever get better. Then, in May, exactly 7 months after her father died, something happened that would change everything. Sarah was still crashing at Amanda's apartment, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room and trying to save enough money to afford her own place. The mailman delivered a stack of mail to Amanda's apartment one Tuesday morning. Most of it was junk, but one envelope stood out. It was heavy, expensive paper with a return address for a law firm Sarah had never heard of. Brighton and Associates, located in one of the fancy office buildings downtown. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. The letter inside was typed on official letterhead, formal and businesslike. It read, "Dear Ms. Mitchell, we represent certain interests of the late Robert Mitchell. We request that you contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss matters related to your father's estate. Please call the number below to schedule an appointment." The letter was signed by Gerald Brighton, senior partner. Sarah read the letter 3 times, trying to understand what it meant. She'd been told that her father's estate had been settled, that everything had gone to Diane. What could this law firm possibly want with her? Was she being sued? Was there some debt she was responsible for? Her mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. But she called the number during her lunch break, using the phone in the break room at work because her cell phone had been disconnected after she'd missed 2 payments. The receptionist who answered was professional and polite. She scheduled an appointment for Sarah the following Thursday at 2 p.m. Sarah wrote down the address, thanked the receptionist, and spent the next several days consumed with anxiety about what this meeting could possibly be about. Thursday arrived cold and rainy. Sarah left work early, telling her boss she had a doctor's appointment. She wore the only professional outfit she still owned, the black pencil skirt and white blouse she'd worn to her father's funeral. The outfit was starting to show wear, the blouse slightly yellowed at the collar, the skirt shiny at the seat from too many wearings. But it was all she had. She took the bus downtown because her car had died the week before, and she couldn't afford to fix it. She arrived at the office building 10 minutes early, took the elevator to the 15th floor, and walked into the reception area of Brighton and Associates. The office was everything Sarah expected. Polished wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the kind of place where important people made important decisions. Sarah felt out of place, like an imposter who'd stumbled into the wrong world. But she gave her name to the receptionist and sat down to wait. Her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. Gerald Brighton came out to greet Sarah himself 5 minutes later. He was in his 70s, tall and distinguished with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He shook Sarah's hand warmly and led her back to his office, a corner suite with views of downtown Columbus and walls lined with law books. He gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his mahogany desk. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at Sarah with an expression that was both sympathetic and serious. He said, "Thank you for coming, Sarah. I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you here. Let me start by saying that your father was a client of mine for many years. He was also a friend. I'm very sorry for your loss." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Mr. Brighton continued, "Your father hired me 8 years ago, shortly after he married Diane. He came to me with concerns about his new wife and a request that I help him protect you in case something happened to him. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious, paranoid even. But Robert was insistent. He'd seen things in Diane that worried him, patterns of behavior that made him question her motives. He didn't want to divorce her because he had no concrete proof of wrongdoing. But he also didn't want to leave you vulnerable. So we created a plan. Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing. What kind of plan? Mr. Brighton opened a folder on his desk. The plan was this. Robert created an irrevocable trust, completely separate from his estate and completely hidden from Diane. He funded this trust with assets that he'd acquired before he married Diane, assets that she had no knowledge of and no legal claim to. He named you as the sole beneficiary of this trust. In the event of his death, I was instructed to wait exactly 7 months before contacting you. Not a day sooner, not a day later. 7 months. That waiting period was intentional. Robert believed that if something happened to him, Diane would show her true colors within those 7 months. And apparently, he was right. Sarah's mind reeled. She said, "What assets? What are you talking about?" Mr. Brighton slid the folder across the desk. Inside were property deeds, financial statements, and legal documents. He explained, 10 years ago, your father purchased a commercial property in the Short North Arts District. It's a 3-story brick building at the corner of High Street and 5th Avenue. The building houses 4 retail spaces on the ground floor and 6 residential apartments on the upper floors. Your father bought the property for $800,000, renovated it over a 2-year period, and has been managing it ever since. The property is fully paid off. It currently generates approximately $180,000 per year in net rental income after all expenses. Based on recent comparable sales in the area, the property's current market value is estimated at $4.2 million. Sarah stared at the documents, unable to process what she was hearing. Mr. Brighton continued. The property is held in a trust called the Sarah Mitchell Irrevocable Trust. You are the sole beneficiary. I am the trustee. The trust document specifies that you cannot take ownership of the property until you turn 25 years old. That's a little less than 2 years from now. Until then, I manage the property on your behalf. The rental income is deposited into a trust account where it accumulates. Once you turn 25, ownership of the property transfers to you completely, along with all accumulated rental income. At that point, you'll have full control over the asset. You can continue to rent it, you can sell it, you can do whatever you want with it. But it's yours. Diane has no claim to it, no knowledge of it, and no way to access it. Sarah felt dizzy. She gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Mr. Brighton's voice was gentle but firm. I know this is a lot to take in, but there's more. Your father left you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when we met. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope with Sarah's name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. He slid it across the desk. Sarah took it with shaking hands. She looked at Mr. Brighton. Can I? He nodded. Of course. Take your time. I'll give you some privacy. He stood and left the office, closing the door softly behind him. Sarah sat alone in the quiet office, holding her father's letter, afraid to open it because once she did, this would be real. She'd have to accept that her father had known what Diane was, had seen the danger, had protected Sarah in the only way he knew how. She'd have to accept that he'd carried this secret for years, planning for a future where he might not be there to protect his daughter himself. She'd have to accept that even in death, Robert Mitchell had been the father Sarah needed. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. The letter was 3 pages long, written in her father's neat handwriting. It read, My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to watch you grow into the amazing woman I know you'll become. I'm writing this because I need you to understand something important. I made a mistake when I married Diane. I saw the red flags, but I ignored them because I was lonely, and because I convinced myself that you needed a mother figure in your life. I was wrong on both counts. Diane doesn't love me. She loves what I can give her. I've seen the way she looks at my bank statements, the way she asks about my life insurance policies, the way she changes the subject whenever I talk about updating my will to include you. I've overheard phone calls I wasn't supposed to hear. I've seen documents I wasn't supposed to see. I know what she is. But I also know that if I confront her or divorce her, she'll find a way to take everything from both of us. She's done this before. I hired a private investigator, Sarah. Diane has been married twice before me. Both of her previous husbands died under suspicious circumstances. Both left her substantial inheritances. The investigator couldn't prove anything criminal, but the pattern is clear. I believe I'm next. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm just a paranoid old man who's seeing danger where none exists. But if I'm right, I need you to be protected. The letter continued. That's why I created the trust. The property in the short north is yours. I bought it long before I met Diane, so she has no claim to it legally or morally. It's my gift to you, my safety net for you, my way of making sure you'll be okay even if I'm not there. But I've put a condition on the trust. You can't access it until you turn 25. I know that might seem harsh, especially if I've died and you're struggling. But I have my reasons. First, I want you to learn to survive on your own. Not because I don't want to help you, but because I want you to know that you can. I want you to build a life that's yours, independent of my money and my influence. I want you to discover your own strength. Second, I don't want Diane to know about the property. If you could access it immediately after my death, she'd find out somehow. She'd find a way to take it from you or tie it up in legal battles. By making you wait until you're 25, by the time you get access to the property, Diane will have moved on. She'll have spent my estate money and forgotten about you. She won't be paying attention anymore. And that's when you strike. The letter's tone shifted. I know this sounds dramatic. I know it sounds like I'm being paranoid or melodramatic. But Sarah, I need you to listen to me. Diane is dangerous. She's not just a gold digger. She's something worse. She's patient and calculating, and she has no conscience. If I die, she will throw you out. She will take everything. She will cut you off completely. Don't be surprised by this. Don't be hurt by it. Expect it. Prepare for it. And know that when it happens, it's all part of my plan. The trust is designed to protect you from her, but it's also designed to give you leverage. By the time you're 25, you'll have accumulated nearly 2 years of rental income. You'll have a property worth millions. You'll have resources that Diane doesn't know about. And if I know Diane the way I think I do, by the time you're 25, she'll have gotten herself into financial trouble. She'll have overspent, overborrowed, overextended. She'll be desperate. And that's when you'll have all the power. The final page of the letter was the hardest to read. Sarah, my darling girl, I wish I could be there to see you grow up. I wish I could be there to walk you down the aisle someday, to meet my grandchildren, to watch you build the life you deserve. But if I can't be there, I want you to know this. You are the best thing I ever did. You are smart, kind, strong, and capable. You don't need my money to be successful. You don't need my property to be happy. But I'm giving them to you anyway, because I want you to have options. I want you to have security. I want you to never have to depend on anyone else for your survival. The property isn't just about money. It's about freedom. It's about knowing that you'll never have to compromise yourself or your values just to pay rent. It's about knowing that you have a foundation to build on. Wait until you're 25. Build your life. Become strong. And when the time comes, take what's yours and don't look back. Don't waste your energy hating Diane. Don't waste your time seeking revenge. Just live well. That's the best revenge there is. I love you more than words can say. You are my greatest accomplishment, my proudest achievement, and the best part of my life. Make me proud. Live well, my darling girl. I'll always be with you. Love forever, Dad. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she carefully folded it and held it against her chest, feeling closer to her father than she had since the day he died. Mr. Brighton knocked softly and came back into the office. He sat down and waited patiently while Sarah composed herself. Finally, Sarah looked up at him and said, "What do I do now?" Mr. Brighton smiled. "Now you survive. You build your life. You become strong, just like your father said. And in less than 2 years, you come back here and we transfer the property into your name. Until then, I'll manage everything. You don't have to worry about tenants or repairs or anything else. Just focus on your own life." But Sarah, your father was right about one more thing. Don't tell anyone about this. Not your friends, not your co-workers, and definitely not Diane. The element of surprise is your greatest weapon. Sarah left Mr. Brighton's office that afternoon, feeling like she'd been given a second chance at life. She still had no money, still had no place to live, still had a mountain of challenges ahead of her. But she had hope. She had a future. And she had the knowledge that her father had loved her enough to plan for this moment, to protect her when he couldn't be there himself. That was enough to keep going. The next 22 months were transformative for Sarah. She took Mr. Brighton's advice and focused on building her own life, independent of her father's money and independent of the trust. She moved out of Amanda's apartment and into a tiny studio that she could barely afford, a 400-square-foot space with a Murphy bed and a kitchen the size of a closet. But it was hers. She paid for it with her own money from her own work. She quit her waitressing job and focused on her career in graphic design, working late nights and weekends to build her portfolio and prove her value to her company. 6 months after meeting with Mr. Brighton, Sarah was promoted to senior designer with a raise that made it slightly easier to pay her bills. She still ate ramen most nights and wore thrift store clothes, but she wasn't drowning anymore. She was surviving. More than that, she was building. Sarah threw herself into learning everything she could about business, real estate, and financial management. She took online courses through Coursera and Khan Academy. She read books about property investment, tenant management, and wealth building. She watched YouTube videos about real estate law and tax strategies. She wanted to be ready when the trust transferred to her. She wanted to be capable of managing the property herself, of making smart decisions, of being the kind of businesswoman her father had believed she could be. She studied her father's approach to real estate, reviewing documents that Mr. Brighton shared with her about the Short North property. She learned about cap rates and cash flow and market analysis. She learned about tenant screening and maintenance schedules and insurance policies. She absorbed everything like a sponge, driven by the need to honor her father's faith in her. But Sarah also spent those 2 years investigating Diane. She couldn't help herself. The need to understand what had happened to her father, to understand who Diane really was, consumed her. Sarah created fake social media accounts and followed Diane's online presence. She watched as Diane sold her father's business to a national real estate firm for $8 million just 6 months after his death. She watched as Diane bought a beach house in the Hamptons and a condo in Miami. She watched as Diane posted photos of luxury vacations to Paris, to Italy, to the Maldives. She watched as Diane started dating a man named Jason, a 32-year-old personal trainer with perfect abs and zero apparent income. Jason moved into Sarah's childhood home within a year of Robert's death. Diane posted photos of them together constantly, at expensive restaurants, at charity galas, on a yacht in the Caribbean. Sarah dug deeper. She paid for background check services using the little bit of money she managed to save. She confirmed what her father's private investigator had found. Diane had been married twice before Robert. Thomas Caldwell, husband number 1, died in 2001 at age 52 of an apparent heart condition. He left Diane $500,000 in life insurance and a house worth $300,000. Marcus Webb, husband number 2, died in 2008 at age 56 from an accidental fall down the stairs in their home. He left Diane $800,000 in retirement savings and a vacation home in South Carolina. Both men had died within 10 years of marrying Diane. Both deaths had been investigated and ruled accidental or natural, but the pattern was unmistakable. Diane was a serial widow, moving from wealthy man to wealthy man, collecting inheritances and moving on. Sarah couldn't prove that Diane had killed any of her husbands. There was no evidence of foul play, no forensic proof, nothing that would hold up in court. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, and when Sarah discovered that Diane had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Robert just 6 months before he died, her blood ran cold. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Sarah became obsessed with understanding how Diane had done it. She researched methods of causing heart attacks that wouldn't show up in autopsies. She learned about medications that could be slipped into food or drink, about stress-inducing tactics, about ways to make a healthy person's heart fail. She couldn't prove anything, but the knowledge made her sick. Her father had died because he'd married the wrong woman. He'd died because he'd been lonely and made a mistake. And Diane had gotten away with it. But Sarah also discovered something else in her research, something that would eventually give her leverage. Diane was drowning in debt. Despite inheriting roughly $10 million from Robert's estate and life insurance, Diane was spending money faster than she could access it. The beach house in the Hamptons had been purchased with a mortgage. The Miami condo was financed. The cars, the trips, the shopping sprees, all of it was being charged to credit cards and lines of credit. Sarah found public records showing that Diane had taken out loans using Robert's estate as collateral. More concerning, some of those loans appeared to involve forged documents and fake business entities. Diane was committing fraud, and she was doing it sloppily, desperately, like someone who'd gotten in over her head and couldn't find a way out. Sarah pieced together what had happened. Diane had expected to inherit everything cleanly and quickly, but probate had taken time. Robert's business had taken time to sell. The estate had been more complicated than Diane anticipated, and while she waited for various assets to liquidate, Diane had continued spending as if the money was already in her account. She'd borrowed against future inheritance payments. She'd forged Robert's signature on loan applications, claiming he'd taken out the loans before he died. She'd created shell companies to hide assets and secure additional financing. It was a house of cards, and it was starting to collapse. Banks were asking questions. Creditors were demanding payments. And Diane, for all her cunning, had made mistakes, mistakes that Sarah was documenting carefully. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Sarah discovered that Diane had somehow learned about the property in the short north. Sarah didn't know how Diane had found out about it, whether she'd hired her own investigator or stumbled across some document she wasn't supposed to see. But Diane knew the property existed, and she was trying to figure out how to access it. Sarah found records of Diane attempting to file claims against Robert's estate, arguing that the property should have been disclosed during probate. She found evidence of Diane hiring lawyers to investigate the property's ownership structure. Diane was getting desperate. She'd counted on that property being part of her inheritance. She'd probably already borrowed against it, and now she was realizing that she couldn't touch it. That's when Sarah knew. When she turned 25 and took ownership of the property, Diane would come after her. Diane would try to intimidate her, manipulate her, or find some legal loophole to claim the property. Sarah needed to be ready. Sarah's 25th birthday fell on a Tuesday in September. She took the day off work and went to Mr. Brighton's office to sign the final documents. The property transfer was simple, just a stack of papers and a notary's stamp. But the moment Sarah signed her name on the final page, everything changed. She now owned $4.2 million worth of real estate. She had access to nearly 2 years of accumulated rental income, roughly $360,000 sitting in the trust account. She was, quite suddenly, wealthy. Not just comfortable, but genuinely wealthy. Mr. Brighton shook her hand and said, "Congratulations, Sarah. Your father would be very proud of you. What will you do now?" Sarah smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd felt in more than 2 years. She said, "Now I go visit my stepmother." Mr. Brighton raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Sarah nodded. "I've been ready for 2 years. It's time Diane learned that she didn't win. It's time she learned that my father was smarter than she ever gave him credit for. And it's time she paid for what she did." Mr. Brighton looked concerned. "Sarah, I need to advise you to be careful. Don't do anything illegal. Don't do anything you'll regret." Sarah's smile didn't waver. "Don't worry, Mr. Brighton. I'm not going to hurt her. I'm just going to take back what she stole. There's a difference." Sarah waited 1 week after her 25th birthday before making her move. She wanted to give herself time to prepare, to make sure she had all her documents in order, to rehearse what she was going to say. She also wanted to give Diane time to stew, to worry about why Sarah might be reaching out after all this time. Sarah called Diane's cell phone on a Monday afternoon. Diane answered on the 3rd ring, her voice wary. "Hello?" Sarah kept her voice calm and professional. "Hello, Diane. This is Sarah." There was a long pause. Diane said, "Sarah, I'm surprised to hear from you." "What do you want?" Sarah said. "I need to speak with you about my father's estate. There are some matters we need to discuss. Can we meet?" Diane's voice turned cold. "We have nothing to discuss. Your father's estate was settled years ago. Everything went to me, as was his wish." Sarah said, "This isn't about that estate. This is about a property you've been trying to claim. The one in the short north. I think it's time we talked about it in person. Don't you?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Sarah could practically hear the gears turning in Diane's head. Finally, Diane said, "Fine. Come to the house tomorrow at 2 p.m., but this better not be a waste of my time." Sarah said, "It won't be. I promise." Then she hung up. Sarah spent the rest of that day and all of the next morning preparing. She printed out documents showing the property's ownership history, the trust structure, the transfer to her name. She printed out evidence of Diane's fraudulent loans, the forged signatures, the shell companies. She put everything in a leather portfolio that made her feel professional and competent. She dressed in a tailored navy suit she'd bought specifically for this occasion, the first expensive piece of clothing she'd owned in years. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't the broken 23-year-old girl who'd been thrown out with $500 and a suitcase. She was strong, she was ready, and she was about to take back everything Diane had tried to steal. Sarah arrived at her childhood home at exactly 2 p.m. The house looked different. Diane had repainted the exterior, changed the landscaping, added security cameras and a gate at the end of the driveway. It looked more expensive now, more showy, less like the warm family home Sarah remembered. She parked her car, a slightly better used car than the Honda she'd driven years ago, and walked up to the front door. She rang the bell. Diane answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. Diane looked different too. She'd aged in the past 2 years, though she was fighting it with what appeared to be regular Botox and fillers. She wore designer athleisure and too much jewelry. Her smile was tight and didn't reach her eyes. She said, "Sarah, come in. Let's get this over with." Sarah walked into the house. It felt strange being back here, walking through rooms where she'd grown up, seeing how Diane had changed everything. Linda's photos were gone from the mantel. Robert's favorite armchair was gone. The warm, lived-in feeling was gone, replaced by something cold and impersonal, like a magazine spread rather than a home. Diane led Sarah to the living room and gestured to the couch. Sarah sat. Diane remained standing, a power move meant to intimidate. Sarah didn't take the bait. She simply opened her portfolio and pulled out the first document. Sarah said, "Let's talk about the property at High Street and Fifth Avenue." Diane's face twitched. "What about it?" Sarah said. "You've been trying to claim it as part of my father's estate. You've hired lawyers. You've filed motions. You've even forged documents trying to prove that the property should have been included in probate." Diane's voice turned sharp. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah pulled out more documents and laid them on the coffee table. "These are the loan applications you filed 6 months ago. You claimed that my father had taken out loans against the Short North property before he died. You forged his signature. You created a fake LLC to hide the transaction. That's fraud, Diane. Multiple counts." Diane's face went pale. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Sarah continued, "The property was never part of my father's estate. It was placed in an irrevocable trust 8 years ago, long before he died. I am the sole beneficiary of that trust. As of last week, ownership transferred to me. You have no claim to it. You never did. And now you've committed fraud trying to access assets that don't belong to you." Diane finally found her voice. "You can't prove any of that." Sarah smiled. "Actually, I can. I have copies of every document you filed. I have bank records. I have testimony from the loan officers you lied to. I have everything. And if I take this to the authorities, you'll be charged with fraud, forgery, and probably a dozen other crimes. You'll go to prison, Diane." Diane's composure cracked. She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. She said, "What do you want?" Sarah said, "I want 2 things. First, I want you to pay back every penny you borrowed fraudulently, not to me, to the banks and creditors you defrauded. I don't care how you get the money. Sell this house. Sell your other properties. Liquidate your assets. But you'll pay back every penny. Second, I want you to sign a confession admitting what you did. The confession will be held by my lawyer. If you ever come after me, ever try to contact me, ever try to claim anything from my father's estate again, that confession goes to the police. Do we understand each other?" Diane stared at Sarah, her face a mask of rage and fear. "What if I refuse?" Sarah leaned forward. "Then I go to the police today. I press charges. I make sure every newspaper in Columbus knows that you're a fraud and probably a killer. Because we both know what you did to my father, don't we? We both know about your two previous husbands who conveniently died and left you everything. We both know about the life insurance policy you took out on my dad 6 months before his heart attack. I can't prove you killed him. Not yet. But I can make sure everyone knows my suspicions. I can make sure the police reopen the investigation into his death. I can make your life a living hell, Diane. Or you can take my offer, walk away, and disappear from my life forever. Your choice." Diane broke. She started crying, real tears this time, not the theatrical performance from the funeral. She said, "I don't have the money. I've spent everything. I can't pay back millions of dollars." Sarah said, "Then you'd better start selling. You have this house. You have the Hamptons property. You have the Miami condo. You have cars, jewelry, art. Liquidate it all. I don't care if you end up with nothing. In fact, I prefer it. You threw me out with $500. Now you know how it feels," Diane whispered. "You're cruel." Sarah stood up. "No, Diane, there's a difference." She pulled out one more document from her portfolio. "This is a confession. It outlines everything you've done. Sign it." Diane looked at the paper like it was a snake. "If I sign this, you'll use it against me," Sarah said. "Not unless you give me a reason to. Sign it, walk away, and you'll never hear from me again. But if you ever try to contact me, threaten me, or come after what's mine, this goes straight to the police." Diane signed the confession with shaking hands. Sarah witnessed the signature, placed the document back in her portfolio, and stood to leave. As she reached the door, she turned back to look at Diane one last time. Diane was slumped in her chair, defeated, broken. Sarah felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. She just felt tired. She said, "You could have been kind to me, Diane. After my father died, you could have treated me like family. You could have split the estate fairly. You could have been a decent human being. But you chose cruelty. You chose greed. And now you're paying the price. I hope it was worth it." Then Sarah walked out of the house where she'd grown up, knowing she'd never come back. Over the next 6 months, Sarah watched from a distance as Diane's life fell apart. The house Sarah had grown up in went up for sale first, listed at a price that suggested Diane was desperate to sell quickly. It sold in 3 weeks to a young family with 2 kids. Sarah felt a strange sense of peace knowing that children would grow up there again, that the house would be filled with laughter and love instead of Diane's cold calculation. The Hamptons beach house sold next, then the Miami condo. Diane's boyfriend, Jason, disappeared the moment the money dried up. Diane's social media presence, once filled with luxury and excess, went dark. Sarah heard through the grapevine that Diane had moved to Arizona, living in a modest apartment and working as a real estate agent. It wasn't the life Diane had planned, but it was the life she deserved. Sarah, meanwhile, was building a different kind of life. She kept her job at the marketing firm, not because she needed the money, but because she loved the work. The rental income from the Short North property gave her financial security, but Sarah wanted to build something of her own. She took business courses at night school. She started investing in the stock market using strategies her father had taught her. She bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, just a two-bedroom bungalow with a front porch and a yard. She adopted a dog from the shelter, a golden retriever mix named Scout, who filled her home with joy. She reconnected with old friends, made new friends, started dating again. She built a life that was hers, independent of her father's memory and independent of Diane's shadow. Sarah also started working with Mr. Brighton to improve the Short North property. They renovated the retail spaces, upgraded the apartments, increased the rent to market rates. The property's value climbed to nearly $5 million. The rental income increased to $220,000 per year. Sarah learned how to be a landlord, how to screen tenants, how to handle maintenance issues, how to make smart financial decisions. She was good at it, better than good. She had her father's instincts for real estate, his ability to spot opportunities and maximize value. Mr. Brighton told her more than once, "Your father would be so proud of you, Sarah. You've become everything he hoped you'd be." 1 year after confronting Diane, Sarah received a letter from a detective with the Columbus Police Department. The letter explained that they'd received information about potential fraud related to Robert Mitchell's estate and were opening an investigation. Sarah knew immediately that someone had tipped them off, probably a bank or creditor that Diane had defrauded. The detective wanted to interview Sarah about what she knew. Sarah met with the detective and told him everything. She showed him the documents she'd collected, the evidence of forged signatures and fake LLCs. She gave him a copy of the confession Diane had signed. She didn't mention her suspicions about her father's death. She had no proof, and reopening that investigation would be too painful. But the fraud charges were enough. 3 months later, Diane was arrested in Arizona and extradited back to Ohio to face charges. She eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and forgery. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the banks she'd defrauded. Sarah didn't attend the sentencing hearing. She'd already moved on. On what would have been Robert Mitchell's 62nd birthday, Sarah visited his grave for the first time since the funeral. She brought flowers, her father's favorites, white roses. She sat on the grass next to his headstone and talked to him like he was still there. She told him about the property, about how well it was doing, about all the improvements she'd made. She told him about her life, about her job, about Scout, about the peace she'd finally found. She told him that she understood now what he'd been trying to teach her, that the best revenge isn't cruelty or destruction. It's building a life so good, so full, so meaningful, that the people who tried to hurt you become irrelevant. She told him that she'd forgiven Diane, not because Diane deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that anger was too heavy a burden. She told him she missed him every day, but that she was okay. More than okay. She was thriving. As Sarah sat there in the quiet cemetery, she thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the girl she'd been at 23, broken and lost and terrified. She thought about the woman she'd become at 26, strong and independent and secure. She thought about her father's letter, his words echoing in her mind. Wait until you're 25. Build your life. Become strong. And when the time comes, take what's yours and don't look back. She'd done exactly that. She'd survived the darkest period of her life. She'd built something from nothing. She'd taken back what was hers, and she'd become someone her father would be proud of. That was enough. That was everything. Sarah Mitchell's story is one of betrayal, survival, and ultimately justice. She was thrown out of her home with $500 and told to disappear. Her stepmother believed she'd won, that she'd gotten away with everything. But Robert Mitchell had been smarter than Diane ever gave him credit for. He'd seen what his wife really was, and he'd protected his daughter in the most effective way possible, by giving her the tools to protect herself. The $4.2 million property wasn't just a gift, it was a lesson. It taught Sarah that real security doesn't come from depending on other people. It comes from building something of your own, something no one can take away from you. 5 years after Robert died, Sarah stood in her own home, financially independent, emotionally healed, and genuinely happy. Diane was in prison, her fortune gone, her reputation destroyed, paying for the crimes she'd committed. Justice had been served, not through revenge or cruelty, but through patience and preparation. Sarah had played the long game, just like her father had taught her, and she'd won. The question isn't whether Diane deserved what happened to her. The question is what Sarah's story teaches us about resilience, about the power of patience, about the way justice sometimes takes years to arrive, but arrives nonetheless. So here's the question for you. If someone you trusted betrayed you like this, would you have shown mercy? Would you have taken the path Sarah took? Or would you have chosen something different? And if you've ever felt thrown away by someone who was supposed to love you, remember this. Your comeback will always be greater than their betrayal. The people who underestimate you, who discard you, who treat you like you're nothing, they're giving you the greatest gift possible. They're giving you the motivation to prove them wrong. Sarah Mitchell did exactly that. She proved that the girl Diane threw out with $500 would become a woman worth millions, not because of the property her father left her, but because of the strength she built herself. That's the real inheritance. That's what Robert Mitchell really gave his daughter. Not money, but the knowledge that she could survive anything. Thank you for watching this story. If you've been affected by something similar, if you've experienced betrayal or loss, or had to rebuild your life from nothing, we want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. Let's support each other. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of survival, justice, and second chances. Because everyone loves a comeback story. And Sarah Mitchell's comeback is one for the ages.